Let's go to
Tim Leonard. How are you doing today?
I am better than fine. I'm doing great.
Good. See, that's what I like to hear. That puts a smile on my face.
I totally agree with you on this, Steve.
Thank you.
This is a very you guys argument. But, yeah, no one ever says they're fine if that means they're actually fine.
Yes, I know. It may be the answer, but, like, what if you are just fine?
Right. Then I'll say, like, what's wrong?
Yeah. No, you don't. You say fine so people don't. You don't want to burden people with your problems.
So you could say good then, because then I really wouldn't burden you. But if you say, yeah, I'm fine, like I would worry about you, Paulie. Be like, what's wrong? I guess some of it is in your delivery.
If you had to put this lacrosse season into perspective, was it fine, good, great? Where would you put it?
It's better than.
How are you doing?
It's better than fine.
How are you doing?
The lacrosse season was better than fine. I'm glad we're starting with this because I guess it was expected that the fan base would treat the loss this way. And I know that the Syracuse fan base has high expectations, as they should. But, yeah, I mean, if you make it to the Final Four, as we said at the start of the season, I think this season was a success knowing that. Obviously, the way that the game went and losing to Maryland in the same fashion that they've lost to Maryland now 8 straight times makes it sting a little bit more, and it certainly makes you go back to the drawing board a little bit about, all right, how can we figure these guys out if we get another crack at them in a big postseason game next year, which could very well happen again. But it's also, Maryland does this to everyone, and seeing some of the chatter online, and maybe I need to just stop reading articles and such after the game, because it's as if people don't realize how good of a coaching staff Syracuse has as well. And obviously Gary Gait is a different thinker and a different coach than John Tillman, but everyone gets out coached a time or two by John Tillman, especially on that stage when he has a week to prepare. So if you're holding Gary Gait to the standard of why can't he figure out John Tillman, well, that's kind of every other coach in the country right now. And of course, Syracuse was as prepared as they could be, and they treated that game very seriously and came up with a game plan and had some adjustments, and it didn't work out. And sometimes I think we kind of overthink one game or one play or one moment and always try and come up with grand theories on why it didn't work out. It just really wasn't their day, and Maryland makes teams not have their day a lot. So despite what was a disappointing game on Saturday, I think we should view this season as a big success.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a shock that Syracuse lost. I mean, my personal feeling is that the two best teams met in the national title game. Cornell and Maryland were the two best teams all season long. They were the 1 and 2 seeds in the tournament, and they got to Memorial Day, and it's unfortunate that the semis went the way they did for Syracuse. But I guess that's the thing that, that it was the wide margin, I think, that people are looking at and say, wow, it wasn't even close. Whereas if they lose to Maryland by a goal or two, then people are saying, well, that's a tough loss. I guess in your mind, Tim, what caused it to get out of hand the way that it did in that first half? What allowed Maryland to go on an 8-0 run and Syracuse just didn't have any answers until the second half?
Well, I think they needed to win more faceoffs than they did in the game. If there was going to be a formula for Syracuse to beat Maryland, we talked about it leading into the game. They had to get out to a lead, and not just like a 1-0 lead, but have maybe a second goal. If they could have capitalized on some of those early chances to make it 2-0 or gotten ahead 3-0, then that's a totally different game because Maryland is then on their heels and can't really play the way that they want to play. And if they could have won more faceoffs, I think that could have allowed Syracuse. We saw John Mullen win that faceoff out of the front to start the fourth quarter. And you need some of that against Maryland's defense because they're so good when they're settled and they're in 6-on-6 situations. And obviously Syracuse did make some mistakes, and it was the first time that those guys were on that stage, really, minus Sam English, I guess. And obviously Michael Grace has played in a D3 Final Four and won a couple of D3 national championships. So they do have some veteran guys that have played in big games, but that is the biggest stage in lacrosse. Maryland has a lot of guys that have been on that stage before. And, I agree with you, Steve. There's a reason why Maryland was favored in the game. The other thing is, going into the game, I thought Syracuse was either going to win a close, maybe 14-13, 13-12 type of game, or Maryland was going to win just like that. And it really did come down to how did the game start was probably going to shape the rest of the game. And Maryland got the start that they needed, and Syracuse was put on their heels. So even though, the margin looks bad and everything like that, and they played Maryland closer in the past, you kind of figured if it wasn't going to be a win for Syracuse, it probably was going to be Maryland doing a very Maryland-like win on that stage again, and I think that's just kind of what happened.
All right, where does Syracuse go from here? In terms of, they do lose a couple of key guys, but, Owen Hilt, Sam English, they lose a couple guys on defense, but the core could be there if everybody decides to come back, and who knows with the transfer portal. But where do you see this team going from here, and how good do you think they'll be next year?
Yeah, I think they will be probably preseason top 3 once again next year, along with Maryland and Princeton. And I think UNC will have a very solid team next year. It feels like UNC is going to bring back a good chunk of their core. I think Syracuse could be the preseason number 1 team in the ACC going into next year, considering they're the only ACC team that made it to the Final Four, and Notre Dame does lose their entire starting attack line. So I think Syracuse brings back just about as much as anyone in the country. Joey Spallina goes into next year, and he is probably the front runner or maybe the favorite for the Tewaaraton, and not the type of favorite that C.J. Kirst was, or that we learned C.J. Kirst was after 2 to 3 weeks into the season. But I would think Joey is definitely on the short list, definitely going to be one of the 5 that is going to be a part of the ceremony and the awards presentation. He just missed out on that list this year, and everyone that is there is out of eligibility. So to me, he's one of the best players in the country coming back. I think it is 2 huge losses on offense with Owen Hilt, and Sam English gives you something on defense as well. And on the wings, he was such a great all-around player. But they are returning an All-American in net and an All-American face-off guy, John Mullen, who's going to be a junior and going to be one of the best face-off guys in the country again. And, it's something to be said for those 2 guys have now played in a Final Four. And I thought Jimmy McCool held his own, really. I mean, Logan McNaney was tremendous as expected. And it's hard to play as good as McNaney, but McCool was really very solid in that first half and kept Syracuse in the game maybe more than they would have been if it was a different goalie. So, you lose Carter Rice as your top short stick defensive midfielder. I think that is a huge loss and a guy that was underrated. You lose your third close defender in Michael Grace, who is, again, probably underrated, if anything. But I think you can fill those spots. Hopefully you add some guys to the portal at those positions maybe. Maybe you try and get a second face-off guy so that when John Mullen does get kind of caught up in some violations, that seems to be sort of his only problem as the face-off guy is sometimes he jumps early. You might have a better second option. That might be a tougher position to find in the portal because there's not many great face-off guys that want to come in and be a backup for a couple years. But I think they will be active in the portal, and the encouraging thing is all these guys have now been on that stage and should be ready to play better on that stage if they do make it back to championship weekend next year.
Tim, you mentioned all the guys who are eligible to come back. With the transfer portal, you never quite know. Are there any guys that that Syracuse fans should be holding their breath on about whether or not they'll come back or hit the portal? Or do you think that by and large, if, especially with this junior class, that, do you think that everybody will be back?
I think they'll be back. I think the culture around the team was so strong this year, and these guys have been committed from, when they stepped on campus as freshmen. They've really checked every box, that 2022 recruiting class. So I'm pretty confident. I mean, obviously stuff could happen, and we'll see how it unfolds. Syracuse has already had 4 or 5 players enter the portal, but those are all guys that weren't seeing playing time this year and are looking to probably go to a smaller school. So that's to be expected. I think overall, I would be surprised if any of the core guys or any of your top 6 on offense aren't back next year. And, I don't know anything more than just probably what you guys know or what the average fan knows, but it seems like that group really likes each other. They're very bought in on getting Syracuse a national championship. And they've checked every box to this point, so there's no reason to kind of stray away from that going into your senior year.
Since we got you, I do want to just get your thoughts on the title game and Cornell. And again, it's a local team that, they were number one for the last 8 weeks or so of the season. They were the best team all season long. They finally, after so many close calls, they finally got the job done on Memorial Day. Just your thoughts on that game and your thoughts on what Cornell was able to do this year.
Yeah, that was awesome. I was really happy for Cornell. I get that they're kind of a rival of Syracuse, but it's hard not to root for C.J. Kurr. I mean, he's an incredibly well-spoken guy who, after he had the game he did in the national semifinal where he was clearly banged up, and I think he was banged up throughout much of the NCAA tournament, I was just kind of worried that he would not be at 100% in the championship game or not play to his capability that he normally does in the championship game, and you'd look back and think, man, that was probably the team and the year for Cornell to do it, but they didn't have a fully healthy C.J. Kurr. And, of course, whether he was healthy or not, he totally took over that game, which was really vintage stuff from him. And, hearing his chat afterwards with Dana Boyle, hearing Connor Busick, who was tearing up, that the Cornell brotherhood is strong, and that meant a ton for those guys. And it's cool for me. I feel like C.J. Kurr, hearing him speak, is kind of the same thoughts I had when I was chatting with Cole Kurr, his brother, when he was here for just 1 year with Syracuse. And Cole Kurr is just kind of a bubbly personality, really great guy. You can see why C.J. is his brother, and you can see why Cole is a guy that came in and wasn't even a part of the team in the fall camp because he was doing Newhouse and trying to get a degree in broadcasting, and that program's so strong. So even though he wasn't practicing with the team in the fall camp and he was only there for a year, he was still named a captain by the team going into the spring part of the season. So I think everyone just speaks very highly in the lacrosse community of the Kurr family, of how hard of workers they are, how hard a worker CJ is. So, it happened to a really good coach, really good top player, and not to overlook the other players for Cornell. I thought their goalie, Wyatt Nuss, really had two of his better games in the Final Four after he struggled a little bit in the quarterfinal round. So it took a team effort for sure, and it was cool to see Cornell win in kind of a different way than how they had won a lot of their games in Ivy League play this year, and that kind of goes back to Syracuse. Syracuse obviously has to kind of learn how to win with that secondary gear maybe, and they showcase that a little bit more this year, but I think that'll be a big thing for them next year.
Yeah, really well said. And we were able to spend a good portion of time on Sunday and Monday with Cornell, and after Syracuse lost, and going back to that semifinal game, I don't know how much you saw it, Tim, because I know you were getting ready to call the other semifinal game with Syracuse and Maryland. But obviously C.J. Kurr, he had never been held pointless in his career, and he had a chance at an empty net goal at the very end of that semifinal game, and he passed it up. And I was talking with one of the Cornell officials on Sunday, and we were talking about that play, and he goes, yeah, he didn't want to just extend a streak with some bogus empty net goal. He passed that up on purpose because he didn't want to make it about him and a streak, and I thought that was, and he's like, no, he's like, that's the kind of kid he is. He's just so like selfless, and it's not about him, it's about the team, and it's about advancing, and they just wanted to run out the clock. They weren't looking for extra goals at that point. I don't know. I thought that it's such a an insignificant thing, but I also think it kind of speaks volumes of the kind of kid he is, because it wasn't the right play there to score. It was all about running out the clock, and he didn't do it for personal gain. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I mean, you think about all the stuff we've heaped praise on him this year, all the talk about C.J. Kurr, and I have not heard a single bad word about him. If anything, you just hear how amazing of a guy and a kid he is, and how he does it the right way. So, and I think the most impressive thing about his game, honestly, Steve, to me, is he just lets the game come to him. Like, even in that Final Four game, where he's probably banged up, they're guarding him really tight, he's not really getting his looks, he's not really a part of the game like maybe a C.J. Kurr should be. He never forced it at all. And honestly, in the first half of the championship game, he didn't do a ton, he didn't get a ton of looks, but he just plays within the game and really lets it come to him like other superstars just don't, honestly. And then when the game does kind of get settled, and he sort of picks apart what are the matchups and where can I expose this team. He clearly took over that game like few guys can take over a game as well.
Yeah, we were talking with Connor Busick after the game, and he said that he pulled him aside right before the second quarter, and he said it was a quick conversation, but he basically said to him, listen, you're the best player in the country. We got your back. Like, just go do what you do. Yeah. And he went out there and he did what he did and, took over that game in the second half. Paul, you got something you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that this was a fine interview. I just Googled fine, and the definition is of high quality. Of high quality.
That is not my definition of fine. So,
well, I go by the dictionary and not the Oxford.
All right, well,
not the Infante.
It's 2-1 because Tim feels the same way. So we got you outnumbered here, buddy.
But it was a high quality interview, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Keep up the fine work.
Tim, great stuff as always.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Fine broadcast this weekend.
Now, if you were to say, Paulie, like, you look fine, like it's some of it's in the delivery, like, how are you today? Like, I'm fine. Like, some of it's in the delivery.
You just have your own definition for a word that doesn't meet the actual definition.
Tim and I are on the same page.
Okay.
All right, we got to take a timeout. We'll open up the phone lines the rest of the way. Maybe other people agree with me. 315-437-7644. And maybe they don't, and that's fine. That is fine. That is fine if they don't agree with me, but it's how I process that word.
All right.
Back after this on ESPN Radio.